Would you believe me if I said this event felt a little like time traveling? Or that, intentionally or not, it's an act of game preservation? Maybe. If you don't have a solid answer, fair enough, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go back a bit. This is Dawnstar Video Games, Dawnstar for short. It's a brick and mortar game store in Richmond, Virginia that specializes in older games. It's a pretty cool place. Cool enough to throw some weekly events around games like Smash or Magic the Gathering that people actually attend. Cool enough to do trade-ins for old games, manga, and so on. Although don't expect to strike it rich. Cool enough to have a sizable arcade that you'll be seeing more of very soon. And cool enough to throw a 6-year anniversary event on August 23rd that I attended. I had marked the event on my calendar for a few reasons. First of all, it literally advertises a Donkey Kong-Cert. How the hell do you not go to an event that's named like that? The name still pulls some serious weight as evidenced by Donkey Kong Bonanza. But the other reason was this interactive museum that was advertising the event's marketing. Now see, this got my brain all hot and bothered. I love museums. They're easily my favorite way of learning anything. I just love the way that they contextualize the present by making sure that we all understand how weird everyone was in the past. Add games to that mix at a shop that specializes in old games no less, and I'm basically Jerry floating towards a pound of cheese. There's also the less fun fact that the history of games has been on my mind a lot lately because game publishers have frankly been making it incredibly hard to actually keep them around. While not a new issue, it's one that's been in the spotlight recently because of the Stop Killing Games movement, which, just in case you don't know, was a consumer movement spearheaded by Ross Scott, aka Accursed Farms on YouTube, to address the anti-consumer and anti-preservationist practice of making games unplayable after publishers and support. Stop Killing Games gained a ton of media attention over the summer after an initiative that was registered to the European Citizens Initiative, a tool that allows European citizens to call on the European Commission to introduce a new law or new legislation in general. In this case, law around publishers' buffoonery and hate for anything that's not making them money. And said initiative this time around received over 1.4 million signatures. Now, there's a whole lot more that we could say about this whole affair, not even mentioning the few specific publishers who are a bit more egregious in the way that they go about killing their own games. But this is a video about a retro game store and not that. So I'm going to link 2 articles that I wrote for my internship at Endless Mode if you want to learn more about that, as well as Cursed Farm's actual YouTube channel, should you want to just get on the know with that whole thing. For now, let's go back to Dawnstar. Remember that arcade I mentioned earlier? Before we make our way upstairs to the interactive museum, let me tell you what it's like taking stock of the sheer amount of history that was in front of me. See, being someone heavily invested in games means that you are existing in a world of references just like any other artistic medium. This isn't to say something so crass as nothing's new anymore, but the hard truth of the matter is that your favorite game owes its existence to a game that came out likely before you were born. I mean, I like understanding references. It helps me form better opinions and criticisms of the things that are out now, and helps me think about what might be coming for the future, because history frankly repeats itself a lot just with a new face. But the thing about living in a capitalistic system that hates preserving things for the sake of learning rather than making money, playing a lot of old games is very hard. I've actually made a whole feature about the ways you can learn about old games without playing them because of how hard it is to play them, which I'll also link in the description. But even with that caveat made, the very first thing, or almost the first thing that I say in that post is, if you can play them, try to play them. And that's where an arcade like this comes in. See, what I really appreciate about Dawnstar Arcade is not really its size, but its curation. You can find a bigger arcade at any super mall or any Dave & Buster's or hell even a Chuck E. Cheese, but you're not going to be able to find a Castlevania arcade box at a Chuck E. Cheese or at a Dave & Buster's or at most big malls. You're not gonna be able to find Mega Man, you're not gonna be able to find an original Xbox or an original PS2. Simply put, most arcades nowadays won't dedicate precious space to old cabinets because their goal of making money supersedes their desire to create access to old games. Now, don't get me wrong, Dawnstar Video Games is still a business. It's not like you can just walk into this arcade for free. It was $15 on the day for me to go in, but it feels incredibly disingenuous to not recognize the effort put into caring about the past. There are many other ways to be making money in video games, as any live service game will show you. So the fact that these guys are still trying to do so while making space for these old games that most people, unless you're really into this space, wouldn't know anything about, I do think deserves a little bit of kudos. Now, speaking of the past, did you know how nice a Super Nintendo Entertainment System still feels in your hands? If you did, damn, you're old as f***. But if you didn't, let me tell you, it's quite nice. See, now I also know because I played one for the first time at the Interactive Museum. Now, as far as museum goes, this was admittedly pretty small. which makes sense. You can only fit so much in a building that was already small itself. But in this case, the stuff here brought by the group RVA Retro Gaming still packed a serious punch. I'm focusing on the SNES here because that's what I played with for the most part. Other people were using the old PCs around me, and so I mostly just watched them from behind there and didn't really get a feel for that. But for the point of this video, just playing around with the SNES revealed to me why it's important to even have access to an old console like this, assuming your parents or uncle or whatever cool family member you may have doesn't have one lying around. See, it's one thing to know that things considered basic game language like today's formalized menu navigation, controller schemes, and the like have come far, but it's something entirely different to tangibly feel it. To understand that your body has already memorized the future that this console played a very serious part in creating was frankly surreal. It also made me both appreciate and criticize harder a lot of things that we do today, just from this initial glimpse. Like, for instance, thank God we have more buttons on a controller. It's actually so nice that controllers evolved to map out their increasing amount of inputs so they not have everything attached to a single button you think is meant for pausing. However, on the flip side, god damn, does this thing look cool. This SNES controller has such a distinct vibe from it versus today's controller, whose biggest difference increasingly feels like it's just whoever's logo is on it. Even Nintendo's. Don't get me wrong, while Joy-Cons are still fun and, like, at least in my opinion, show that Nintendo cares about design in a way that PlayStation and Xbox either doesn't or just really needs to hire someone new when it comes to making the look of these things, Joy-Cons still have a bit of that weird corporate modernization and sleekness that feels like they're trying to take the fun out of it, or at least the playful aspect of games, in an attempt to be a little bit more serious, which is like, we can make serious games, but you don't need to take the fun out of them at the same time. Now, moving along, let's also take a look at this other fossil, the Magnavox Odyssey 2, which was the immediate successor to the first ever home console, the Odyssey, and it was released in 1978. 12 years before the SNES debuted in Japan in November 1990, and then eventually came to North America in August 1991. Just looking at this thing had me thinking about current gen consoles differently. For instance, I love the fact that you can see the cartridge and that it's so striking in comparison to this hulking machine. It's a visual contrast that's just really appealing to the eyes. I also just think typewriters look cool, so having a console that mimics that aesthetic just by function here is also pretty sweet. I also now have a new appreciation for how little space my current consoles are taking up in my home compared to what this thing would. Like, as much as I have issues with how a PS5 looks because it's ugly as shit, at least I can orientate it in multiple ways, or at least not have it take up too much shelf space, which gives me multiple options around my house to place it. Meanwhile, if I try to place the Magnavox Odyssey 2 anywhere, like, the number of places in my apartment that I could put that thing without it being an eyesore or at risk of just being broken by any number of things is very minimal. Overall, that small interactive museum did exactly what I hoped it would do. It taught me a lot about the present. It just continued to hammer home why it's important that not just games are preserved, but also their hardware, their coverage, just many of the things that ultimately end up in that space. Now, do I think everyone and their mother needs their own console now? No, most of us are not going to be using it most days. Like, it's kind of one of those things where it's going to be not a one and done per se. Like, if you want to become a video game historian, you're probably going to be playing with some of these things a lot, but most people aren't. It's just to say that the past does have a place in the present, and I do think there are spaces that should be dedicated to making sure the past can exist safely so it can be examined and understood. And that's where something like Dawnstar and the events that it throws comes in. Now, a lot of this video thus far has been pretty tactile. I'm talking about the history that I'm feeling in my hands, but I didn't really go there to totally talk about stuff that I'm playing with my hands, and you didn't really come here to talk about the stuff that I'm playing with my hands. You came here, and I came there to talk about the history that I was going to be playing in my ears. Which finally brings us to the Donkey Kong-Cert. The concert finally took place after the end of a Super Metroid 100% speed run that had been taking place for like an hour and a half at that point. Also, I considered talking about this speed run more, but ultimately I think I'm just going to point you to the speedrunner's Twitch video. His name was Marcio64, and he was a pretty chill guy. Apparently he's beaten the time here by like 10 minutes in the past. He was just out of practice. The overall TLDR of it is, it was cool. It stopped people on the tracks, and the commentator TJ Wade did an awesome job of explaining what was going on to people like me who never played Super Metroid and understood what they were looking at about as well as an AP physics exam. Now, this was also the debut of the Dawnstar Arcade's in-house band, appropriately called the Dawnstars. And let me tell you, the Dawnstars killed it. exaggeration, this was genuinely some of the most fun I've had this year. I've attended my fair share of backyard and basement concerts, as well as big stadium ones, and this was easily up there for me in terms of just pure vibes. The energy was high, the crowd was actually engaged and chattering among themselves about their fond memories of DK or just music in general. And it's being surrounded by all these arcade machines that were going off at the same time, not overtaking the music, but at least adding a nice visual flair to everything, just made the whole event get an extra oomph that it wouldn't have had otherwise. This whole thing also flooded my mind with memories of Super Smash Bros. Brawl because, funnily enough, since I've never played Donkey Kong Country, my first exposure to its music was actually Super Smash Bros. Brawl since it was heavily involved in that music soundtrack. So all of this is basically what happened as I listened to Dawnstar take the crowd through Donkey Kong's greatest musical hits, accompanied by some nice and frequently funny visuals.
No, it was not self-deprecating, it was just me deprecating. You just made fun of me, you didn't make fun of yourself. You're bigger, faster, and stronger, what about me?
History is a funny thing, even in games. For all the ways we can engage with it, whether that be playing old games, watching others play them, poring over their old hardware, or even old magazines, it's moments like the Dawnstar's performance and the surrounding crowd that reminded me at the end of the day, people are the best way to learn about what things were like. It's the multiple bonds that come together over this shared interest across demographics that form communities who ensure that the things that brought them together in the first place are remembered. And while I hope this video has shown you the practical benefits of the act of preservation, part of me thinks just getting the opportunity to feel what I and several others felt in that room, in that moment, was enough to hold on to all this old shit in the first place. And that's it from me. I'm Wallace, by the way. Thanks for watching. If you ever find yourself in Richmond, check out Dawnstar. And just because I know people ask, no, this isn't paid promotion. I just thought this was a very cool thing that I went to on a random Saturday that had actual real connections to broader things going on in the gaming industry, and so it was worth highlighting and just having a little bit of a discussion about. Again, any articles here are going to be linked in the description. Please leave a like, leave a comment, talk about your favorite old games, talk about your ways that you preserve games or just games media or games hardware or whatever may have you. Just a cool history story if you have one. Also, this is my first video like this where I'm doing field reporting, so please leave any kind of feedback that you might have about what else you'd want to see when it comes to B-roll footage. I know the audio is probably not going to be great for this because I don't have great equipment, which is a good point to say. I'm also going to share my Ko-Fi here if you want to just leave a tip if you really like this video or just want to see some improvements in quality. Never necessary, but greatly appreciated. If you want to see more stuff like this or read more stuff like this, subscribe here or subscribe to my website. If you want an idea of the kind of things that I write about there, last thing was about the game discounting and how an early moment in the game does a really good job of talking about some of the drawbacks of big business entering a small town. And then before that, I did an interview with an adult game developer, an adult games critic, Big, who's also in charge of the blog Adult Analysis Anthology that critically covers adult games, something I felt was pretty important given the huge amount of censorship they've been facing and the broad impacts it has on people even outside of adult games. Cool shit I'm doing over there at the end of the day. So get on the ground floor while you can. That's it from me now. Thanks again for watching. Please take care of yourself and your loved ones. Ciao.